Hi everyone, welcome to the Athletics Course podcast, and today I've got Jack Pullan on with me. So Jack is the first team sports scientist at Leeds United. So Jack, thank you very much for joining.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me.
So Jack is going to talk a little bit about his journey from going to university, finding placement opportunities, volunteering, and then now how he got a role into pro sport, and then how working in a first team environment. He's going to chat through his experiences and providing a bit of advice for those who may be on the same journey. So Jack, the first sort of question I normally go through these podcasts is, why did you want to get into high performance sports? What are the reasons why you want to get to where you are now?
Yeah. So I guess kind of like most people from quite a young age, was involved in sport. So I participated in football from about 10 years old, I think, which was quite late as a footballer. But I also did martial arts for quite a few years. So growing up, very active child, always out the house doing things, competitions, training, etc. So that was obviously quite a good introduction to sport. And then going into school, I quite quickly realised I didn't want to be someone who was sat behind a desk all day, working 9 to 5. Going to football with my friends, sort of 14, 15, 16, looking around the football pitch and going, well, I can't be a player. That opportunity's gone, but, maybe I can do his job or their job. And looking at the staff on the pitch and seeing, where they were. Again, coaching, it's quite unlikely unless you've come from a pro background. But then I saw the fitness coaches and I was like, oh, okay, that could be a path. So went to college, did a PE A-level like most people, and off the back of that went to university to do sports science. And that was really the kickstart of the journey.
So obviously, I think a lot of people who go on this journey now, as myself, that play sports and, like you mentioned, get to a point where realize that playing's not going to be for them. So why did you decide to pick right as kind of the fitness route, maybe compared to maybe the technical coaching?
Simple thing. So, going to university, doing a sports science degree, you're very quickly thrown into physiology and biomechanics and nutrition. A little bit of psych as well, but to be honest, I wasn't a huge fan of psychology. So I started to kind of branch away from that as my degree and developed into more kind of S&C background. So the physiology and biomechanical modules, I was straight onto them. And like I say, when it comes to coaching, I think, every kid's dream is to be in football or to be a coach. But again, having an understanding and being around the right people to know that actually that requires probably a football background. So that was never going to be the option, really. I mean, I guess the fitness coach was like the next best thing. I can't do that, so let's pick this instead.
So looking back on it now you're within the environment of pro sport, how did university support you on that journey in terms of the course you did? Anything that you did in your course that might have supported you in terms of getting to where you are now?
Yeah. So I guess that question's kind of branched into two. So start with, I think you need to have the academic understanding. So you need to have done the theory and the content, and obviously that's what the university provides. So from that level, coming into any environment, whether that's elite, whether that's academy roles, whether it's your Sunday league volunteering, I think you need to have some understanding of what you're doing and what you're trying to apply in order to obviously for it to work. So obviously from that, you go to university, you study hard, you do your course, get assessed and pass. That's kind of the basic level. I think within that, then there's kind of an expectation on you if you want to get to that level. I think you need to do the extra work, look for placements, look for opportunities, consult with your tutors, where you can about things that maybe you don't understand or need extra help with. And I think by doing that over time, you then start to stand out a little bit and get ahead of the curve, because ultimately there's going to be hundreds of people on your course or in your modules. There's going to be dozens of people doing the same stuff as you. So I guess in the back of my mind, going through that process at university was always kind of, well, how am I going to stand out here? Because there could be 100 people going for one role, which I think is the ratio. And you need something to stand out. And for me, the first step there is, asking questions and trying to, speak to people that might have answers that you want, essentially.
And now just reading, just before we came on this chat, was around, you sent me a thread around on Twitter, lots of different advice that you found quite resonating in terms of as a young practitioner. And one of them just mentioned in terms of what you spoke around there was be bold, take shots. And I think that's what you said there in terms of around finding opportunities. How are you going to make yourself different in terms of the number of people be graduating every year? So whether that's speaking to your tutors, doing some extra work like volunteering. So did that sort of resonate to you when you read that?
Yeah. So a little bit into my background. It's quite boring, but on my final year, on my undergraduate, I basically came back into uni in October and decided this was a year that I had to really get some sort of volunteer work or an internship of some sort. Through potluck, we had a class and our tutor was ill. And so we had a cover, and the cover tutor happened to be working for the RFL at the time, particularly in the women's game, and was quite involved in the England setup there from women's perspective. Came in and just said that they're always open to help and that their season was starting, pre-season was starting in November, with the season starting then in early March. If anybody wants to help out with testing and going on different clubs, that would be an option. So we went across to the outdoor pitches, and on that walk across, I decided to help him with the kit and ask him a few questions. Said I'd be really interested and keen to get involved in that. Kind of went back to the group and got a bit of stick, teacher's pet, this and this, which again, I think is the mindset of a lot of students because no one really stands out. And as the thread says, be bold and take a shot. What have you got to lose? He says no. But what have you got to gain? It's a door. It's a door opening into potentially a new environment. Long story short, off the back of that conversation, we'd agreed that I was going to help out a couple of nights a week, going around the Super League teams and testing the academies, not only for the women, but also for the men. So suddenly it's gone from women's team to suddenly now you're working in both games. And like I say, by the end of the day there, I'd met the England Performance Unit staff that were based at Beckett. And again, I think you need a little bit of luck. I was very lucky that they happened to be based in my university, but also at the same time, you make your own luck by asking the right questions and taking shots and being bold. And that was really the start of it. That was my first introduction into sport of any sort. And we'll get into it a little bit later, but actually that happened to be the door into leagues as well. So yeah, be bold and take a shot.
Well, I can resonate with that as well because that's how I got into professional cricket, where you have in my case, it's a lecture for a module. And then I got talking to him and he said there was an opportunity to do women's cricket over the summer for 6 weeks as a volunteer opportunity. Then I took that. Well, I offered myself out for that. And then off the back of that, managed to get a part-time role. Then it became a full-time role, then the lead S&C role from that. So like you said, just what's the worst that can happen from asking for any opportunities from whether that's your lecturer or whether that's any guest speakers that you mentioned as well. So I think putting yourself out there to find those opportunities because it's not going to come to you on a plate, as it were.
I think that's the thing. You speak to anybody now, and again, we'll get on to networking, but as you do begin to network and you speak to people, it's not a coincidence that everyone has the same sort of entry and that it's typically you doing something to go above the rest. You're putting your head above the proverbial parapet to stand out. And like I say, when you look at the numbers of people that are graduating from sports degrees every year, there's only a finite number of jobs in the game or in any sport, whatever your discipline is. So it's just finding them ways of standing out. And stage one is that if you want to work at a high level, you're going to have a little bit about you where you can, as I said, be bold, but not too bold. Not mistaking that for arrogance, but having the confidence to give it a try. And like you say, there's no negative to it. And then as you had where you've kind of used that to go up the ladder, similar sort of thing. So I tested with the RFL doing the academies for about 6 months. Within that time, also managed to work with the women's national teams. So predominantly it was called the DICE squad. It's kind of that their 16s academy age. But off the back of that, the World Cup teams were all preparing for the World Cup based in the UK. So I managed to work with the England women's senior team, doing some testing at university. And again, that was all through the back of this connection I made with my tutor / mentor at the time. And that was that. Fast forward a couple of months, we had conversations and he knew that my desire was to go into more of an S&C background as opposed to doing the testing. A role opened up, unpaid voluntary role opened up at Castleford with the women's team. I got asked to stay behind after the lecture and he just said, if you want it, I'll put your name forward. Don't let me down. Your first session is Sunday, off you go. And that was it. And that's the start of the journey. And again, similar to you, work hard, keep working hard, and then before you know it, a role opens up with maybe the academy men's team, with then the idea of going further and further. So yeah, it's not uncommon to see that be the entry point, really.
And you mentioned networking there, and I think that just shows the power of speaking to people, because then word of mouth, people really resonate from that. And when you speak to someone, they might say they might not need support, but they know someone else who you might be best speaking to. So,
Exactly.
yeah, exactly. So, I think it's really powerful for a student to start networking, whether that's through using LinkedIn, whether that's through you speaking to people. So is that something you did, obviously, in your time in that, especially in that final year of your degree?
Yeah, I think when you think about networking, I think specifically now people think of LinkedIn connections and I've got 500 plus connections, so I've networked. I think on base level, when you're first starting to expand into an industry, then yeah, you need to touch bases with people. But I think as you progress your career, I think the thread talks about this. There needs to be a bit of a reciprocal give and take. So I was very aware that I was getting all this advice and getting all this help off people, but actually I wasn't in a position where I could kind of give back. I guess the outcome was slightly different because I was getting the experience and in return they were getting a set of hands to help out on the testing days. So in that sense, you do get that give and take. But I think in general now, yeah, you see a lot of people messaging and it's constantly just like, can I have, or do you know of? I think the thread talks about at some point, where does the question then become, what can I do for you in return? And I think that was something I always had in the back of my mind. Um, which, like I say, as a university student, you're probably not going to have that ability because you are in a position where you're just starting out and you're just learning. But yeah, from my experience, it was tutors rather than LinkedIn. Again, there was a group of us that would quite often ask them to stay behind after a lecture and maybe get a coffee. So we'd buy them the coffee and then in return, we'd, pick their brains, again, give and take. And just through time, that became the thing. We were quite fortunate that with our course, there was a lot of them that had come from professional backgrounds. So you're learning the content, you're learning the theory, which is fantastic. Obviously, you need that, like I said before. But then there's also that, okay, well, how does that apply in the real world? Because you could learn about, I don't know, anything. You could learn about linear periodization, for example. But actually, how would that work in a football setting? And it was quite lucky that we had people that had been there and done it, and we could pick their brains about that. And again, that impresses them. So in return, they're then seeing that, you are going above and beyond, you are putting the extra effort in. So then they're more likely to help. And the cycle just continues and continues and continues. And then you add more people in from different perspectives with different ideas. And that's how your network grows. So you see people now and they talk about networking on LinkedIn and it's a fantastic tool. We all use it. So we met through it as well. So it's a great tool. But I think, it goes beyond just saying hi to people. And actually it's that invitation to share ideas and have a conversation with the greater good being a greater depth of knowledge.
I also think it's good for students to have an opinion on things as well.
Yeah.
Um, so offer their opinion on something that someone might be posting on LinkedIn, or someone might be a practitioner, might have a really specific topic they have an interest in, and if you have an
Hmm.
opinion on that as well, that whether it's right or wrong, then that still offers an interest and a spark, and then conversation on a common area of topic as well that that person can chat with as well. So
Yeah, I think you do see it a lot where you'll have a connection, you'll see a comment on a post and someone's opposing an argument. That's not negative. That's positive because again, it's sparking that conversation. You're going to get a rationale from both parties, and obviously off the back of that, you're going to have a more informed decision in the future. And there's nothing wrong with having an opinion. So again, I was fortunate. I was doing internships during my masters. We were learning the content again from an academic lab-based perspective, the gold standard, as it were. But then actually, I was seeing it day in day out. At first in rugby, and then eventually at Leeds, I was seeing it day in day out with the first team here, and the two weren't adding up. So I'm going back to lectures, and it's done in the right way. I wouldn't call out whatever the content was in the class, but actually I'd stay behind and say, look, really interesting piece here, but that's not how I've seen it done in the real world. Why is that? And then again, you have that trade off of, everything you look at university is going to be evidence based practice. But unfortunately, sometimes in the real world, it's practice based evidence. And there's a bit of a trade off there from time to time. But again, every time I did that, there was never any ill feeling. It was always actually they were quite grateful that you were pitching that argument to them and you were having that conversation. And then, funnily enough, actually, I bumped into an old tutor of mine about this time last year, checking in on how the class was going and how the new cohort were. And he said that none of them asked that question, which I think if you're part of that, you're missing a real trick because you've got years of experience sat there across the lecture hall use it, you know?
So now I want to talk a little bit around your placements and opportunities. So you had a couple of different
Yeah.
internships or volunteering opportunities. So how did you go around making best use of these opportunities? Because as someone as a student, they might be not as confident. So they might go maybe stand in the back of the room, or they might just kind of shadow and not really do too much. So
Mhm.
how can you? I know you mentioned around the testing sort of stuff, which is real good hands-on practical sort of approach you can get. So how did you make best use of developing as a practitioner in those opportunities?
It's a good question. It's taking slowly through a couple of points. So again, I'll try and go through one at a time. I think to start with, you talk about the character at the back of the room who potentially, isn't the most confident. I think there comes the point where you have to realize that you're not at university in a school setting. I think it's quite easy when we go to university to think it's just another level of school. Ultimately, you're there to get a degree and you're there to get a career. You can have fun, you can be a fresher, you can have a good social life, but ultimately you're not there to make friends. You're there to get a career. And I think for me, I'm quite lucky that I just had that innate sort of confidence to say, actually, I don't care if I look silly for my hand up and asking that question. I want to know because I'm not there to benefit you or him or her. I'm there to benefit myself. So I think there comes a point where you just have to take it with a leap, really. And you have to go for it. Ultimately, like we said, the opportunities are there, but they're not going to come to you. Most universities now have got a vast sort of selection of opportunities at multiple levels of sport, in different sports, different disciplines. But you have to take the initiative and you have to go and be the one to grab it because ultimately there's going to be a dozen people there that want the same thing. So that, I guess, is the first side of the question. And then with regards to your skills, I think, again, it comes down to just learning as much as you can. I think I actually spoke to a senior member of staff at another club a couple of weeks ago, and I think the phrase he used was be a sponge. Be a sponge, absorb everything, see what sticks, see what works for you, see what doesn't work. Talking about experiences myself, I remember coming into the first team here at Leeds, which was my final internship of my university life. Uh, I hadn't touched a GPS unit, and I was coming in here as a sports scientist, where most of my role is required to have an understanding of GPS. So that's, quite a scary thing. But again, be open to it. Go in there and accept that you're not going to know everything straight away. You've got this abundance of knowledge in staff that are already in these environments, so use it. And they're not expecting you to be the finished article. If you can come into an internship with previous experience, fantastic, great. But ultimately, they're taking on university students who they know have got little to no prior experience. So they're not expecting the world from you. They're just expecting hard, honest, trustworthy individual, be punctual, and obviously have some level of competence. And then throughout time, you'll begin to gain that confidence because you'll start to see the process is paying off. And then, within 6 months, it's a doddle. I don't think there was any one light bulb moment for me, but when I look back now compared to where I was, it just sort of clicks into place. But there's no one eureka, I've done it. It's just before you know it, you know how to operate the software. Or with practice, you know how to run this, or you know how to do a warm up, or you know how to download a GPS. Whatever the situation is, it just comes with time and practice.
When you got these opportunities at the start, what was your
Mhm.
thoughts as a student when you were offered to work at, well, they said you'd be working for free. And has that sort of changed now looking back in terms of your thoughts in that process? Because it can be a controversial topic among
Yeah,
whether people should spend their time for free.
yeah. Um, so I sit on the side of the fence that says you should really expect it. Again, unfortunately, we work in an industry where the vast majority of these lower level roles are unpaid, whether that's through a lack of funding or whether that's just through the fact that they know that they can do that. You do hear stories about people where they are doing roles for free, and it's not because the funding isn't there, it's because of essentially a bit of exploitation. It does happen. Um, but I was very aware of that going into it. So I joined my degree knowing that my first roles were going to be unpaid, and I was open to that. I was very fortunate that, as it happened, the RFL testing role, that was volunteering unpaid work. The Castleton role for the women's team, and then the academy the following season, they were both unpaid but expenses covered, which again is more than what most people get. So I couldn't complain on that side of things. But to me, that was a bonus, not an expectation. And I think that was the difference. I had a couple of friends and peers that were also had internships, and they maybe had expected some sort of expense. or they expected some sort of wage. And I don't think that's the right way to be. I don't think you can expect a stipend. I think if you get one, great. But early on, again, we talk about being realistic as well in that thread. You're there as an extra set of hands, maybe someone just to shadow and help out. You're not going to be getting paid the same as a member of staff. And quite often these lower roles that you get through universities, quite often your boss might be a part-time staff member anyway. So if they're getting paid minimal, what are you getting paid? And I think that was just my attitude was always expect it, and then whatever happens next is a bonus. So that was during the undergrad and then sort of start of my master's. So this is taking us now to November 2022. And then we all knew on the masters, at least Beckett, that there'd be some sort of connection to the football club. So when the opportunity came out, we were expecting it to be academy internship. As it turns out, it was first team, which I knew I had to go for. Very fortunate and very, very lucky to have got the role. And again, then I found out that actually came with some sort of stipend. Again, fantastic bonus, but it wasn't what I expected. So I was still working a part-time job 2 nights a week as well to kind of accommodate for that lifestyle. I think that's the norm, speaking to people. I think in an ideal world, yes, every role be paid. I think a lot of the time they should be, but you hear about professional roles that aren't paid. So I think for internships and volunteering, there's just no chance, unfortunately.
I think we often forget the other sort of value that you're going to get from volunteering positions, such as if that volunteering position is right and it's done right and it's got the right people in, it can offer great value in terms of other areas, such as mentoring, such as really good practical experiences. And if a student paid a mentor who was a high level practitioner, they could be paying £200, £300, whereas they're getting some mentoring for free if you think of it in that way.
Yeah, and there's obviously we're thinking now purely from that side of things. But what are the soft skills that you gain? The chances are you're working with a squad of a different age group to you. So if you're working with academy level, okay, well, how do I interact with a 9-year-old versus a 16-year-old? You could be working with 7 or 8 year groups. Suddenly you're learning how to adapt to each one. If you're fortunate to be in a senior environment, you could have players that are 16, 17. You could have players that are 35, 36. Complete opposite ends of the spectrum with regards to their career. One seasoned pro, been around the block. You're not going to reinvent the wheel with them, and you've got to learn how to communicate and advise them in a very different way to if you've say got a 16-year-old fresh in the academy, maybe on their first contract, who actually is a bit more malleable and is more open to certain things. The way you interact with the two, very different, and them sort of soft skills, they go under the radar, and I think a little bit underappreciated at times when you think about these roles. I know, speaking to friends from when I was in university, everyone wanted to work for Leeds or work for this club or that club because they're a big club and it's a status thing. But actually, you need to put foundations to get there. And sometimes the unpaid roles on a cold Thursday night on a 4G pitch somewhere, actually, you know what? If you're there hands-on doing the work every night, that actually can sometimes be better than a role where you're learning through observing. So I found that. I went from Castleford, where I was programming S&C sessions. I was programming pitch-based warm-ups and pitch-based drills for agility or speed or endurance, really enjoying that side of things. And then come into a first-team environment in professional football where you're in a Premier League team, Premier League players, Premier League staff. Suddenly, I'm not doing that. I have to then learn how to adapt. So I'm then taking notes through observing rather than doing in that side of things. There were other aspects like the GPS, etc., where then I started to take that on. But you have to adapt.
And you mentioned a couple of times there, those opportunities and those experiences and those opportunities, is that where the gaps that university might not teach you as much, that's where those gaps fill in terms of now you're working in pro sport? So looking back, did those experiences were they more valuable than your time in university?
I think it's a little bit of both. Again, I talked very, very early on about the content. You need to have done the university process right to get yourself into opportunities and to open the door. But then when you get into an environment, you realize actually how little you know and how much continual learning you need to do. So again, to harp on about this thread, I'm making it sound like it's the Bible, but honestly, it was one of the best things I read. And it talks about, how little we know and kind of how open to continual development you need to have. So going into my role here as an intern at Leeds, I never touched GPS. I never dealt with OBI and Tableau, which for those that don't know are data visualization tools. I had an okay amount of knowledge around Excel, but not to a point where I'd say I was an expert. Still not, by the way. And again, I'm still learning now, and I still, still learn bits and bobs even now, and that won't change. And I think in that side of things, I think looking back at university, it would have been nice to have some exposure to that before coming in. But then also, having had to think about it, I guess the university is there to teach you the content and the theory. And then it's, again, we talk about running above and beyond and being bold and taking that step. It's then down to you to take the initiative. So speaking to practitioners, I knew that you need to have an understanding of GPS. You need to understand how to visualize those reports to go to key stakeholders, whether it's the fitness coach or the manager or the coaching staff. So I kind of expected that to be the case. And again, not to the level they could have been, but I started to do a little bit of work on my own away from university, practicing these things, learning how to apply certain formulas or learning how to code on softwares. I wasn't great, still not great, but it was a starting point. I think, like I say, looking at universities now, it would be nice to have that exposure straight away. I think the most on my course we looked at was Excel and stuff, which was still fine. But actually, when you get into the real world, there's quite a lot that is missing.
So the last topic I want to chat around with you is how has it been for you in terms of working in pro sport, especially first team football, which can be a high pressure environment as a young practitioner, especially when you're wanting to learn and you might not know everything all at once. So how are you finding it in terms of a young practitioner working in first team sport?
Firstly, it's amazing. Again, we all come into our careers wanting to get to the top, and I'm very privileged to be where I am at such a young age. Quite typically, you'll hear about staff that do an internship at a first team level, then go to an academy for a couple of years, really learn their trade, and then find a role in the future. So to have stayed here is amazing. So we're going to kind of touch really on a few points we've already made in this conversation, but when I first came into the role as an intern, you're not expected to have answers. You're not expected to know that much. You're there really to get into experience, help out where you can. But the jobs are pretty simple. They're pretty easy. The reason that, there's less responsibility, less pressure. Stepping away from the internship and going into a paid role full time, suddenly, there's a little bit more expectation on what you're bringing to the table. You're no longer in a position where you can maybe make the mistakes that you were before, because actually this time it matters. Where you maybe had someone to kind of catch those mistakes before, maybe not even trusted with this as your remit. And I think that's difficult. But again, I think if you manage to work yourself into the situation and you've done what we talked about before with the internships and putting yourself out there, you've probably quite a robust character anyway. I think for me, it was accepting that although I'd just moved away from the internship and I'd gone into a full-time role, I still don't know everything. I was surrounded with a group of staff that have been amazing, and they've got an abundance of experience and knowledge behind them, which was good because I could offer a fresh opinion maybe from my perspective of what I've just learned or in contemporary research. But then actually it's having that conversation with the idea of it's not me telling what's there, it's me asking. And then in return, I get back that information. So for me, knowing that I wasn't going to come in and be an expert and just continue to be a sponge, continue to soak things up, I think that was definitely the right approach. I have friends that have gone elsewhere and similar sort of thing. I think, just accepting that you are early in your career, you've got learning to do. And I think just not having that ignorance really towards it. With regards to the player facing side of things, I think it's very similar. Again, we talked about the different players, a 17-year-old versus a 36-year-old. I came into an environment where suddenly, I've kind of got to, potentially advise on recovery strategies, for example. Well, if you've got a player that's 17 that has hardly touched on this stuff versus the player that's 35 who's set in their ways and has done the same recovery practice after every game for their entire career, you've got to adapt how you speak. So for me, it was understanding that you're not going to reinvent the wheel with these guys. You're just going to offer a fresh idea, but ultimately it's their decision. rather than, and again, you hear stories about it, and the thread talks about going in with that I know best attitude typically doesn't work very well. Again, I come back to, I think if you've got in these positions, you probably already had that emotional awareness, and you know where you are and at what level you are, and it's just continuing to do what you've done that got you there.
And I'm just reading two quotes there from that thread. We will put this thread in the show notes for people to read back.
Yeah.
It says, be honest about what you don't know.
Yeah.
And it also, another one was, be prepared to look foolish. You must first be the fool to become the master. And I think that's quite a good quote, because in terms of it puts you where, well, it puts your expectations to where you are at that moment. Like, you're not the finished article, like you mentioned, even though you have maybe got a degree or a master's degree, you might have done UKCA, so on. So yeah, it's kind of, you're still being that open to learn off other people. And personally, I don't ever think you're really the finished article. I think there's always opportunities to learn in different areas. So it's being open to speaking to people.
Definitely. I think I could be wrong, but I think about the shred has a word that I can't retrieve. But essentially, senior staff and senior players are pretty good at working out when someone's not quite telling the truth. To put it nicely, I think, like you say, about being the fool to become the master, not so much. But for me, it was more having an honest conversation. So I remember we had a player that brought in some recovery pants. It was the blood flow, and it's the first time I'd been exposed to it. So rather than pretending to know, I said, right, can you talk me through what you're doing? So he gave me his rationale from his side of things, showed me the protocol. And I said, cool. I went away, researched it, came back, and it was, right, what do you think? And then we had a conversation about where I think it could really improve or where it was right. Again, multiple times where we'll get asked, what does this, what does that mean by any player? The worst thing you can do is pretend to give an answer, because they're going to repeat that to somebody who's going to correct you if you're wrong. And if you've lied to them, you'll lose the trust, and it's very, very hard to gain that back. Whereas if you say, do you know what, actually, I don't know that, but give me a couple of days, I'm going to go find out the answer, and I'll come back to you with option A, B, C, D, you'll get more respect in the long run, and they'll buy into that much quicker and much more easily, shall I say, than if you try and just flag it on the spot. I think that's the worst approach you can go with. Again, like you said, if you do UKSCA or your NSCA, or you do, I don't know, any other sort of continual developing certificates, it doesn't mean you're the expert. Again, I can name numerous occasions where I've gone to cue something a certain way because that's what the book told me. But then actually speaking to somebody who I'm working with, a senior member of staff, they'll say, actually, if you change this cue, you'll get this response, or it might change this metric. So for example, one example would be like force plates. We typically use our force plates as part of our readiness testing and monitoring. If you cue somebody to react to the flash on a force plate, it can alter certain metrics like RFD. Whereas if you tell them to ignore the flash on the screen, but actually just go in there ready, you might find a more true representation of their rate of force. The little things like that I didn't learn at university, I didn't learn on courses, but through applied practice, that's actually a better way to go. You're always learning. You're never the expert.
I agree completely, and I can resonate a lot with that. I don't think players are cleverer than you think into it, and like you said, they can find out if you're not telling the truth or if you're making things up. And I think I've found that personally, I think players respect you more if you say, look, I've got your best interests at heart. I'll go research this, I'll go find out more about it because I want to improve your performance, I want to help you develop, so I'll go learn on this and advise you on what I think as well. So I think, and like you mentioned, I think the key to working in a team environment or working with an athlete is trust as well. And it's a lot easier to lose that trust than to build it. So I completely agree.
And also, I guess as well, you're in a team environment, but you're working within a team. So you, again, rely on other members of staff. If your area of expertise isn't this topic, there's nothing wrong with saying, I don't know, I'm going to go and consult the person who probably is a specialist in that or is more knowledgeable than myself. There's nothing wrong with doing that, really. I think the fake it till you make it idea is flawed. Again, the thread discusses at that point and that phrase specifically. There's no point because there's so many voices in an athlete's head, whether it's from family, whether it's from peers, whether it's from outside coaches, wherever it may be, someone's going to give a different opinion. And if you're not right, then yeah, like you say, it's very quick to break that trust and very hard to build it back. And ultimately as well, you're a practitioner working for the club, so you can't be giving out false information. I think, like say, if you've got senior staff there that know better than you, rely on them, ask them the question, say, here's what I think, but what's your insight? They might agree. They might say, actually, no, go on a different route. There's nothing wrong with asking the questions.
So to wrap up this conversation, there's been a lot of advice and lots of great stories I think we've spoken around there. So any young practitioner want to work in high performance sport, whether that's sports science, strength and conditioning, nutrition, whichever one, what's your advice, would you say, in terms of for them to get the most out of their university degrees or placement opportunities to get to maybe pro sport?
I think stand out. I think be brave, take a risk and stand out. And I want to give one last kind of anecdote before we get off the air. But
Of course.
So when I was getting the internship at Leeds, I was quite lucky that the recruiting staff member from the university who liaises with the club happened to also work with the RFL. So I thought I'd put together a pretty strong CV and a pretty good cover letter. Felt quite confident when applying to the role. And I got a swift text from my mentor, the tutor that I originally spoke of, saying your CV needs work. And I was like, really? Yeah, I thought it was fine. And he was like, you've got in because you've mentioned me. And they've asked about me. And they've asked about you, to me. And off the back of that conversation that they had, he then, recommended me to go for it. And I got the interview and then obviously so on. But that wouldn't have happened if I was just a run-of-the-mill student who comes in, does the work, answers questions and gets off. And I'm not saying that I was the perfect student, by the way. There was many an occasion where I would sit in the back of the lecture hall on my phone. There were days where I just couldn't bothered. That's completely normal. You're not going to be behind the curve for the odd day here and there. But I think it's just staying on track with what you want to get out of the degree, what you want to get out of your career, and making sure that in the long term, all your actions are aligned to that goal. And yeah, I think the be bold and sort of, grab it is the perfect idea.
I like that. And again, I think be open to opportunities, whether that's in pro sport, whether that's with the university teams, whether that's your grassroots team down the road. Be open to opportunities for wherever you can learn.
And I mean, that's the conversation we got into, is that, you think about the opportunities at university and typically you think of external clubs or organizations, but actually there's, a million university teams across all different range of sports that you could tap into. Again, they're going to be unpaid voluntary roles, but you know what? You might bump into an S&C who is going to remember you, appreciate the help, and then down the line, that could open a door somewhere. I think, pro sport is a small world, and I think actions speak a lot louder than words. And I think if you stand out and show a bit of a willingness to go above and beyond, it goes a long way.
So if any young practitioner or anyone wants to get in touch with you, ask a few more questions or see a bit more about your journey, how should they maybe get in touch with you? And also, like you mentioned, get in touch with you in the right way, not just ask.
Yeah, I think there's always the way I would go, typically. With regards to the ask. I mean, I'm an open book. I'll happily share any knowledge or any ideas I can. I think my attitude to anyone listening would be just, again, I would reiterate, think about what you could offer someone in return. Not necessarily me, because again, I'm still quite young in the game and I'm still new to this environment. So I more than most appreciate any help that I got along the way. But you'll come across some people that will expect you to maybe offer something back. So it's finding where you can offer, and if you can't, then at least acknowledging that, I think is a good thing. I always appreciate when I get a message that says, I appreciate the time, I appreciate this, because it just shows a little bit of understanding that actually, there is that give and take.
And I think most practitioners enjoy coffee, so I think if you offer to buy someone a coffee, that might work.
Coffee is always coffee in and around Leeds is always a good shout as well.
So Jack, thank you very much for chatting. It's been great to hear about your journey and what you're up to now. So I'm sure a lot of people have a few questions they want to ask you off the back of that. So thank you very much for your time, especially working in first team football. We're always short on time in terms of to do these things.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for having me. And again, if anybody has any questions, my LinkedIn's always an option. If not, pass them on to Isaac, and I'm sure you can fire across to me, and I'll get back as soon as I can.
Will do. Appreciate it, Jack. Have a good rest of your day.
Cheers. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Athletic Skills Podcast. I hope you enjoyed our discussion and found it helpful in learning more about impacting your youth athletes' movement and physical development. If you did enjoy this episode, please take a moment to give us a subscribe and share to any other coaches or teachers that you think it may help. Also, if you have any feedback or topics that you'd like us to cover in future episodes, please feel free to reach out to us on social media or on the email in the description, and we'll be more than happy to try and tackle those challenges you are facing as a sports coach or a PE teacher. Thank you very much, guys, for listening. I look forward to speaking to you soon.